And joining us now for the 150th episode of the J. Stevens podcast, I mentioned it earlier, is Greg Rakestraw, a gentleman that I have listened to via the radio or via calling high school games or post-game for the Colts, or watched him call games as well. With me being a local guy here in Indianapolis, he's one of the guys that I really enjoy listening to. He's easy to listen. He's honest, and I like that from broadcasters. But Greg Rakestraw, welcome to the J. Stevens podcast. How you doing?
Jay, thanks for the kind words, buddy, and happy to join you on a round number edition. Thank you for the invite.
Yes, sir. No problem. No problem. Before we get into what you're currently doing now via ISC Sports Network or the Colts post-game, things like that, let's go way back to when you were a youngster. When did you know that you wanted to have a career in broadcasting?
The standard running joke is that I had the innate knowledge as a 5-year-old I was not going to be a good enough athlete to be a professional ball player. And so this was going to be my way to be around sports for a living, was to be a broadcaster. I've always had a voice that is projected. And so I'm sure that at some point in time, at the age of 3 or 4, somebody said, hey, you ought to be an announcer. And that seed kind of planted. Mom and dad had like audio tapes of me as a kid at the age of 2 or 3, like imitating like game show hosts and anchors and stuff like that. So part of it was just kind of, I think, a blessing that I kind of knew what I wanted to do. So from a very young age, I knew that I was going to be a sportscaster. And growing up in Southern Indiana and kind of more rural, I didn't get cable television until I moved to college. And so I grew up in a 3 or 4 channel existence. And so sportscaster was meaning, hey, I'm going to go be a television sportscaster. I'm going to do the nightly sports every evening at 11 o'clock. Well, ended up that I went to a college at the University of Indianapolis that had an outstanding radio program. So I kind of ended up going more of the talk show host and play-by-play route. And now I've been doing this long enough where luckily I kind of do a variety of things, both from a radio and television standpoint, and get paid to go to ball games for a living, which is a pretty good life if you can work it out that way.
It is, and I was curious if like your mom or dad would be able to dig up some of those old tapes, and sometime you're on a show post game for the Colts, and they say, "Oh, we got something for Greg that he did and it hasn't been played for a while," and they play that over the airwaves, and everyone gets a big kick out of it. I would love to hear some of those old tapes.
Only problem is they're all 8 tracks at this point, which kind of gives away my age. And so if we can find something that plays 8-track tapes, we can absolutely dig those up. No problem.
You mentioned U of I. You graduated there, I believe, in 1998. What were some things that you did there that maybe helped you, that you look back now and you say, well, when I was in college, this course or me doing this for this show helped me with where I am today?
Well, I was exceedingly lucky in that I ended up going to UIndy for a variety of reasons. And the reason I selected the University of Indianapolis was that I got a great scholarship offer from the University of Indianapolis. So I was very lucky. I attended UIndy on a full ride academic scholarship, which is lucky on so many levels for me. One, I met my wife there, and we have been now married for 21 years. 2, I had a chance to play tennis there. And it's a great recruiting pitch where you can walk into a coach's office and say, hi, I'd like to play, and you never owe me a dime. You tend to get told, hey, practice starts at this date, show up whenever you would like. But then thirdly, not just the quality of program that I went to, but the fact that I got to be in such a wonderful market and sports town to where I was able to easily make that move from working in college radio to working part-time at WNDE to working full-time at WNDE. So many people in radio end up going the small town route and then aspire to work their way back at some point in time. Never had to do that. My entire career has been spent in the greater Indianapolis area. I've worked at some smaller radio stations, so I've had, to some degree, some of the small town experience. And having grown up in a small town, I think I know that well. But I was very lucky that my full-time radio career began a month before I graduated from the University of Indianapolis. I got offered a job. You get to that last semester of college, you're like, all right, it's about to get real. I had a lot of part-time gigs, a lot of experience elsewhere, but a job opened up at 1260. I never really had to go chase down a lot of interviews or resumes or things like that. I actually had to drop classes to be able to take a full-time job. And so I had to come back and do a bit of a victory lap the summer after May of 1998. So when I tell people that I quit college early to go to the pros, I'm not lying. That actually happened. I had to come back and I had a degree holder at commencement. I actually have the degree someplace on file.
Does anything from that day, well, college years, either a radio show that you worked with or a TV station that you did stuff for, does anything kind of stick out from your memory bank from back at that time?
Oh, of course, a lot of things. At UIndy, they have a very professional radio operation, WICR, 88.7 FM. It is a mixture of jazz and classical and news and community programming and University of Indianapolis sports. And because it was not run like a college radio station, I got tremendous on-the-job training from day number one. I got a chance to start doing play-by-play and color commentary from the first semester that I was on campus, which now probably doesn't happen that way just because there's more kids in the program. But I got lucky at the time that I was there. I got a world of experience immediately and off the bat. I got to learn how to host a talk show, being at that radio station, learn how to be a DJ. All these are things I did, from a professional level at some point in time. I also had the wherewithal to take an internship in TV because I did not have as much television experience. I also took my internship in the news department and not the sports department.
Okay.
My mind was, hey, listen, you've kind of got an in from a sports standpoint. Let's go do the news thing and let's see which of these things you really want to do. And after 13 weeks, it was kind of like Thomas Edison learning how not to make a light bulb. I'm like, this is not what I want to do for a living, which is so funny. Thinking that up until a couple of years earlier, I'm like, hey, I'm going to go be a newscaster. I'm going to do news. I'm going to do sports. No, I'm not. And thankfully, I had that internship like only 2 years into my college experience where I had 2 more years left to go, where I'm like, nope, being a play-by-play guy, being a talk show host, being an anchor, that's really what my future is going to be. So I had the wonderful opportunity of doing those things in what I would say is one of the top 10 sports markets in the country in Indianapolis, because of the love that we have for not just our pro teams, but, given the hat you're wearing, the love that we have from our college sports, given the place at the table that high school sports has in the city of Indianapolis, and given the events that come to Indy every year, obviously led by the Indianapolis 500, but Final Fours, at the time, the ATP Tennis Tour, et cetera, et cetera. There are so many things you can learn while you're in college and yet get your name out there from a professional standpoint. I was exceedingly lucky that I ended up at the University of Indianapolis.
And we'll talk about the indie sports scene down the road in a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about WNDE because I know a lot of people outside of Indianapolis, they're saying, how is Indianapolis able to get the Final Four so often to be in rotation? Or why is the Indy 500 so big? And why do people care about the Pacers when they're not consistent like other franchises in the NBA? And we'll talk about that later on, because if you're not here, it's almost something that I think you can't really experience if you don't have the firsthand knowledge and going to the games. But you as a youngster, you're from down south. Did you know that indie sports was the way that it is when you were younger? We can hit this now.
No, I mean, it was I thought I knew about the Indy 500s because I would listen to the race, or where I grew up. So the race started being live on television when I was in the 4th grade. Okay. So I barely remember watching the Indy 500 on a Sunday night after it had happened. It became live in 86. And of course, God has a sense of humor. It rained it out for 2 days. They didn't run the 500 for another week. It was the following Saturday when they ran the 500 back in 86. But, I can sit here and spit off the names of winners in the 80s and early 90s, but I didn't know it until I came to Indianapolis. And I dated a girl in high school whose parents were from Chicago. And when I told them where I was going to go to school, they're like, you're going to Indy and no place? By the time that I came here, that was not the case. Mm-hmm. So, there was the first Final Four in 80, when the Final Four is not what the Final Four has been for the last 30 years. Then there was the Final Four in 91, which was this huge momentous thing, for the city of Indianapolis. And part of that transformation mid-80s to mid-90s, as far as this place really being kind of a sports mecca from a nationwide sense. And so I get to town in 94, as they're finishing Circle Center Mall, back when Union Station was a big deal, right as the Pacers were getting good for the first time, mm-hmm. and the Colts were starting to be a bit more competitive on a regular basis. So again, timing is everything in life. So I know the foundation that was laid. I kind of got to town when it was still a work in progress, and when a lot of that work had been done, after the Pan Am Games, after that first Final Four. But I mean, in the embryonic stages of my career, the Final Four is here in 97. The Final Four is here again in 2000. Peyton Manning arrives on the scene in 1998, and people need to acknowledge how that draft pick changed all of Indianapolis, not just the Colts, but all of sports in Indianapolis. It led to the team staying here and potentially not moving someplace else and getting Lucas Oil Stadium built, which led to getting a Final Four every 5 or 6 years, and which led to having a Super Bowl here in 2012. I was here for the Formula One races when they were here. And again, they might have been a little bit boring, but those folks' money spent awfully well in downtown Indianapolis. It's why the Speedway is trying to bring back a Formula One race as soon as they possibly can. So I was here for the early days of the Brickyard 400. And so it's amazing to think how much things have changed. But Jay, by the time I got here, a lot of that work had already been done.
Gotcha. WNDE, and I want to go a little back into my high school days. I graduated from LC in 2007.
Yep.
And so when I was at LC, I was the guy, I was kind of carpooling to school and from school. People always in my car. But when I was by myself with my dad, it was WNDE. And after school, it was always Mark Patrick. Well, I thought, and maybe a little bit after that, but I thought Mark Patrick and Dan Patrick are brothers. And so I was like, wait, so I got Dan Patrick on ESPN. I think he was still at ESPN at that time. And then
Correct.
I got Mark Patrick here locally. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. I got a local guy. I don't believe they're related, but that's kind of how my connection with that too was. I was like, oh, I don't know any better. There's no Google where I can figure out, oh, they're not really brothers. So in my head as a youngster, that was great. But that's where my love for sports talk radio started, was WNDE. And then I heard your voice. I don't know what station it was on. Maybe it was WNDE.
950.
Then I heard JMV. And I don't know when JMV got on the scene, but I am still, every time I hear you, now I can put the voices, the differences. You're Greg Rakestraw. JMV is different. But I'm still the youngster in me at the time when I was younger. I couldn't tell who was who. You would fill in sometimes, and it'd be like, oh, JMV's still here. No, that guy's not JMV. His flow is a little bit different. It's Greg Rakestraw. But going back to WNDE days, what was that like when I think you were the afternoon drive host, when you're getting like the hearts of everyone getting off of work, they're tuning into you, to your show, to hear what you have to say. What was that like once you got thrust into that role?
Well, that was, okay, so I got my start at WNDE, which is 1260, and obviously is still there. So 1260 is the OG of Indianapolis Sports Talk Radio. And for a little over a decade, it was the only one. And it wasn't completely sports talk. When I first started working there, it would be Bob and Tom in the morning. G. Gordon Liddy would be on after that. So it was kind of news, talk, and sports. But then there were shows like the Fabulous Sports Babe. You go into the Wayback Machine with that program. Pharrell on the Bench was like the 10B to 2A show.
Yep.
And that guy's like he gargles razor blades to have that voice. I would hurt my vocal cords if I tried to imitate him on this program. We would carry a lot of play-by-play. By the time I got to NDE, they briefly had both the Colts and the Pacers. At the time, they had gone back to WIBC. The Colts would eventually come back a couple of years later. Pacers have been at Emmis, ever since that time now for the last 25 years. And so my first shifts at WNDE was board hopping, usually baseball. And when we say board hopping, you're the one that makes sure the commercials play. Yeah. Now that is largely done by computer. Back in the day at WNDE, there was literally someone inside of the building 24/7, 365 that was running commercials every 15 to 20 minutes, just there to make sure everything was working properly. There were 3 radio stations in that building, Q95, X103, and 1260 WNDE. And there would be 3 human beings there, 3 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Somebody's going to be there running those 3 radio stations. And so I worked 2P to 7P, oftentimes doing Major League Baseball, making sure the commercials played properly. And then 6A to 10A, making sure the commercials played properly. And it was part of your job that when you were doing those shifts, there were sports updates every 20 minutes or so. And you would craft a 60 to 90 to 2-minute sportscast. And it was great reps that I got to learn. When I got that full-time job at WNDE, I was the producer of the Sports Daily, which was Tim Bragg and Bill Benner, and so occasionally Conrad Runner filling in for Billy B. And so I was the producer of that, and I was the board op and anchor for the Jim Rome show. So that was my first full-time shift, was noon to 7, Monday through Friday, doing that. After a couple of years doing that, I said, okay, this has been great, but I think this is about as far as I can go here. So I make a shift to a station that is based in Franklin, 95.9 FM. That was news, talk, and sports. very much conservative news talk, but would mix in local sporting events, trying to, again, be a player in both the Indianapolis market, but especially on the south side of Indianapolis. That group had two stations, 950 AM and 95.9 FM. 9/11 happens. And the revenues that were going to 950, basically, which was a kind of a hodgepodge of religious programming, paid programming, et cetera, in about a 4-month span, drop in half. And it became, okay, what can we do? And I really didn't have anything to do with the AM at the time. I was running the FM. But it became, what can we do with the AM to potentially make money? And I go, guys, I think we could get ESPN radio with a couple of phone calls. I had about 3 heads turn at me like I had swore in that meeting. Like, are you serious? I said, absolutely. I said, they've been getting less and less airtime on 1260. 1260 is the only sports stick in town. I said, they kind of have deals with both Fox and ESPN. So we can offer ESPN far more clearance. I said, our signal's not as good, but it gives them shows in the market. Like Dan Patrick's show had never been aired in the Indianapolis market at the time. And literally within about a week, we had a deal in place for ESPN radio to come to 950.
That's amazing.
So at that point, I'm 25 years old, and I am now the program director of the ESPN radio affiliate in Indianapolis, and I am also the drive time talk show host at the ESPN radio affiliate in Indianapolis. And so again, like I said, timing is everything in life. Hard work creates good luck and creates good opportunities. There's something to that. Sometimes it's just blind, stupid luck. And I think I've had a combination of those two things. So I am going head to head with Mark Patrick for a couple of years in that time slot. And by the way, Mark Patrick and Dan Patrick, I can confirm to you, are not related. In fact, neither one of those guys, Patrick is not their real last names. Just a heads up.
Okay.
Yeah. So I am friends, and it's not hard to figure out Mark's actual last name since his son is Drew Storen. Major League Baseball pitcher.
Okay. That's the connection. Okay. It makes sense now. I've heard him talk about that before,
yep.
But then it slipped my mind. It did slip my mind for a while.
Correct. And just so folks know, Hannah Storm is Mark Patrick's cousin, both the last name of Storen. So there you go. So in case you can, and I won't reveal Dan Patrick's name because he's not kind of as public about it as Mark to some degree is.
Right.
But no, they are not of relation, as Forrest Gump would say. So with that, when I'm doing a show on 950 and realizing that I'm finding a guy that has, and again, he was a friend then and he's a friend now, a guy that has built up a brand identity, has been in the Indianapolis market for 15 years. People may have heard of me from a sports standpoint, but don't know me. It was like, okay, what can we do to program opposite of Mark? And Mark was doing more entertainment stuff, was doing bits, was doing a little bit more shtick, was doing kind of the morning radio Bob and Tom stuff and carrying it over to sports. And so we were very much hard-hitting sports. I mean, we were hardcore sports, and not trying to deviate. And we were trying to be as local as possible. And we gained some really good traction with that. Once Mark's contract was done at WNDE and his contract was done at SiriusXM, that's when his producer, JMV, who got the name JMV because he was going by the radio name of John Michael. Mark Patrick thought it was Jan Michael, as in Jan Michael Vincent. And you got to be older than Jay to get that reference. And so it became JMV. Hence, that was the birth of those initials about 17, 18 years ago. And John, his actual first name, not his actual last name, has rode that out now over the course of the better part of the 2 decades. So even though he and I used to work together at 1260, we were kind of going at it from a head-to-head standpoint, from a ratings point of view.
Right.
So that's what I did a daily talk show in Indianapolis. I was evenings on 95.9 from September of 2000 through June of 2002. I was then on an afternoon drive on ESPN 950. And at the end, what would become XL 950 after the start of 1070 going all sports in 2008. I did a daily talk show Monday through Friday afternoon drive from July of 2002 through May of 2009. And I can't believe it's been over 11 years since I had a daily show at this point.
2002 to 2009. And I'm thinking about, as a indie sports fan that I am, I'm thinking about the things that took place during that time period. I don't know much about the Indy 500, but I do know, and it's just a casual football fan will know, that's Peyton Manning, and I call those the glory days of the Colts. You have Reggie Miller, Pacers went to the finals in 2000, and then the Mouse at the Palace had 04, and then Reggie Miller retired, and the Pacers kind of retired with him, being a little joking around that they did have a falling of that. But I don't want to say what sticks out. I will ask you this question, because I did mention Mouse in the Palace. You weren't on air that night, because that was a Friday night when that took place.
Correct.
I remember that vividly because this is me and my memory. I'm a big high school football guy. Warren Central was playing that night in the tournament. Something was playing.
That's the semi-state round, Jay. It was a semi-state.
Okay. I turned from that game because just like most games during that time period, they had the game under wraps. So I said, well, let me go from this game to the Pacers game. And it was, I want to say Mike Breen on the call. I forget who the color commentator was, but I turned, I was like, wait, okay. I saw the foul. I see our test on the scores table. I see the beer come and hit him in his face. And it was like all hell broke loose. It was insane that the next 3 to 5 minutes about what took place. I saw the idiot that walked. I say idiot on purpose because I saw the guy that ran on the court, got in Jermaine O'Neal's face. You're like, these Pacers, these players are protecting themselves. So if you're going to get in the guy's face, you're kind of asking to get hit or to have something happen to you. I saw Stephen A. after that. And I'm guessing you were on the radio the very next Monday. Is that correct?
Correct. So that was the Friday night before Thanksgiving.
Okay.
So I had Roncalli in Columbus East from a play-by-play standpoint that night. I then hopped in the car to drive to Green Bay, Wisconsin, to go do IUPUI in Green Bay the following night, which was George Hill's first college basketball game.
Okay.
Was that Saturday night? Colts, I believe, played on Sunday. But what I remember about then the next week, because we would have had shows Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, was that we did not talk a lick of Colts that week. I mean, it was very much, oh, by the way, the Colts won on Sunday. Right. Which obviously, as a regular sports talk listener, that doesn't, in the Pacers season, like we'll talk about the first couple of games, but then they're kind of on the back burner compared to the Colts. I know the Colts season is over. And then by the time we get to January or so, then we start to talk more about Pacers. And the Pacers really dominate things as we get to the last month of the regular season. And college basketball is over with. And then by the time we get to the end of March, it's all Pacers until whenever the Pacers season is done. Well, that week, I mean, I'm not sure I had to have any guests on a show. It was literally just doing open phone lines and letting people vent about what had happened. Because by that time, by Sunday night, David Stern gives a press conference where he announces that, Steven Jackson, 30 games, Jermaine O'Neal, 30 games, Ron Artest, the season, things of that nature. And so in one sense, it was very easy radio. We're 16 years out from that happening. Mm-hmm. And it's still stunning to me. The penalties levied against the Pacers were harsh. There was nothing against the Detroit Pistons in that scenario. No. That there was really no recourse other than people forget that J.O.'s suspension, I think, got dropped from 30 to 15 games. Okay. So, literally, J.O. came back for the Christmas Day game against the Pistons at Bankers Life Fieldhouse at Conseco back then, in which the Pacers won. But I don't think Steven Jackson's suspension was shortened. Certainly, I know Ron Artest's suspension, was not shortened. But, no, I mean, the primary thing during my days as sports talk show host that stand out would be the Super Bowl win. Okay. The AFC Championship game win that led to that. The year before, the cataclysmically bad loss, to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Oh my goodness, man! When the Colts had everything, set up for that. And I remember that, and it's why it set up that feeling of that AFC Championship game in January of 2007. It's 21-3, and I'm sitting there in the press box, and I go, I cannot do these shows again. The last 3 Januaries, I've done this show about the Colts being disappointments in January. The first year around was not as bad because it was the AFC Championship game. They had won those 2 games before against Denver and Kansas City. And while I was disappointed, I was like, all right, hey, the Patriots are really good. We'll get them next year. Well, the next year was 20-3, and it wasn't all that close. It was a speedy end to a great season. The next year they get out to a 13-0 start. And then obviously the Steelers game was just dreadful all the way around. And they're down 21-3. And I'm just like, no, I do not. I'm thinking of excuses to not be at work the next day. I'm like, mentally, I cannot do this again. And then they get that last field goal before halftime. They score on the back end, and all of a sudden, and that is just a magical night anyone that is an Indianapolis Colts sports fan. And the one thing I'll tell about that AFC Championship game is we had done a full day of coverage. You know, we were on the air with different shows, different locations, you know, for 12 hours leading up to that game. And to be able to, you know, the feeling of when Marlon intercepted that pass. So us media types would be up in the press box,
mm-hmm.
and we thought the game was over. We would start to, because there were such a limited number of stairs and elevators, we would try to scamper to get downstairs as quickly as possible to be able to then get interviews, you know, post-game, locker room, press conference area, et cetera. So when Adai scores, a bunch of us head down and get downstairs, and then we would sneak in the old ATA touchdown club, able to kind of walk out and see the action was on the field. So I was kind of up against a wall, and right into that midfield when Marlon makes that catch. And the beer shower I got, people going crazy above me, was tremendous. It was glorious. And then to be able to go to Miami a couple of weeks later and cover a Super Bowl was awfully special.
I bet. I can't go away from this part of the years about you being there at WNDE, and I know you mentioned high school. You called a Ron Colley game, and then you mentioned going to IUPUI and George Hill. I can't talk about this at all without talking about Greg Oden and Mike Conley. Did you call many of their games?
Yes.
I don't know. Okay, you did. I don't know when you started calling high school sports locally. But the one game that sticks out in my mind was, I think it was 05 sectionals against Arlington. I don't know if you were there. That was at LC. I was, like I said, I was an LC grad, and so that was my sophomore year, I believe. So I remember like this. That was like the biggest game I'd ever been to in my life, high school wise. And so I'm thinking Mike Davis is right in front of me. I remember Kiefer, and I forget Ellen's coach's name. I think was it Hicks or Nix?
Larry Nix was the coach.
Larry Nix. So I remember them at halftime. I saw Kiefer and him kind of get into it. But it was like a heated battle. But as a young sports fan, you love it because you know how good Greg Oden is. You know how good Mike Conley is. I've heard about them in big games, but that environment was kind of where my love for high school basketball in Indiana started. High school football in Indiana's there, but basketball is a whole lot higher. What do you remember? Because I know you got firsthand knowledge. What do you remember from those days, from how crazy it was of their 3-year run?
Those guys were so good. And if Greg Oden hit free throws as a freshman, they might have won 4 years in a row. And the team that beat them in the regional at Hinkle that day in 03, went undefeated. That Pike team was 29-0 that won the state championship that year. I did not do the LN Arlington game. I know of what you speak. It makes me think of the old Roundhouse gym at LC.
I miss it,
For
man. I miss
nice
it a
as
lot.
The new gym is. I love the old Roundhouse. I miss that place. But that was a Friday night sectional semifinal, and that was still done with 2 officials. And I think it was from that game on. Everybody said, "Hey, we have to go with 3 in the state tournament," and pretty much they did from that point, because the athletes had gotten so good, 2 guys couldn't keep up. 2 great officials could not keep up. It needed to be 3. But I did a lot of LN's tournament games.
Okay.
Over that run. So I saw a lot of those guys 04, 05, 06 postseason. Saw a lot of them when it come to regular season games as well. What I remember about those LN teams was 2 things. One, they would play a 1-3-1 zone, and Greg Oden would take up half the court. You literally could not move the ball.
You couldn't get past him, no.
Because you couldn't pass the ball diagonally. And if the guy that was dribbling was focusing on Greg, all of a sudden Mike Conley sneaks in behind you, steal, lay it up, score. And LN just, owned teams, back then. So that, and I had a chance I was at the Final Four when those 2 guys played the 1 year together at Ohio State, was there in Atlanta in 07 with that. But no, those guys were a remarkable high school duo. I never thought Mike Conley would have the career in the pros that he did. I thought Mike was a good player. Clearly, Mike was in Greg's shadow. But to think that Mike is, getting ready to, I guess he completed year 13 in the NBA with the Utah Jazz is kind of tough to fathom. It ages all of us. When I say that, other thing was, and it's human nature, and it maybe sadly led to the injuries he dealt with, was the beating that Greg took in a high school basketball game. Because it was nothing that was biased against Greg. It was just human nature. You're like, listen, if I call every foul of this 6-foot dude guarding 7-foot Greg Oden, I'm going to foul out their entire team by the second quarter. And so it had to be, that dude got his kidneys punched every night. just because again, you just go, hey, I've got to let this guy do something to stay competitive in the game. And so those are the things I remember about Greg. You couldn't pass the ball against their zone. And literally, he was like a human jungle gym because 3 people were hanging on him every time he made a post move wearing that green and red uniform.
It was fun to watch. I'm still amazed that Jack Kiefer, the head coach at that time, that he's able to find a way to develop big men. Because you go back to Eric Montross, and I know,
Sure.
I think with John Stewart, early 2000, 99 to 2000, unfortunately passed away. I think he was passed away on the court or shortly after he left. And then you get Greg Oden, and then he's had Rob Petty and DJ Hughes, now 6'8", but still it's more big man style for high school. And it's just amazing that he is able to find ways to develop big men. And I've missed some. I mean, you could have gone back to Stephen Van Treese right after Greg Oden. Just amazing that he's able to not just be successful, but find ways to develop young men. And I remember I heard Shamar Avance, going to jump a little bit to recent memory.
Yep.
Shamar Avance, after a game, I think it was maybe after the Carmel game this past year or another game after that. And they were asking him, they were like, what's it like playing for Kiefer? Like, what? And this is Jack Kiefer, for those of you that are listening, wondering, oh, how can I Google this guy's name? It's Jack Kiefer, coach here in Indianapolis, locally, high school basketball. He's like, what's it like coaching for Jack Kiefer? Is it with the age gap? You're like 16, 17. He's whatever age he is. What's it like? He's like, man, it's fun. We love playing for him. I mean, he gets on us, but we expect that with basketball. And I was sitting next to a Northwestern basketball coach, assistant coach at the Ellen Carmel game this year. And one thing he spoke out about was he loved the attentiveness of those young men during timeouts. Because I think you called that game, and I believe it was close the entire game. Mm-hmm. And the coach said, I love their attentiveness as young men, that there's all these things pulling them, telling them, oh, I'm going to say something. This old guy doesn't know how to relate to you, and he can't connect with you. Well, he can. I don't know how Kiefer does it. I don't know how he's able to find ways to connect with young men. But even when everything shut down, I heard Kiefer on an interview on a podcast, and they were asking him, what was it like? What were the coaches saying? And Kiefer's like, Coach, the players are asking me if we can have a cookout at my house. And I'm like, guys, we can't do that. But even over the years, he doesn't just develop young men, but he finds ways to connect with the generations that are way younger than him, and they love him for it. And I know you've seen Jack Kiefer and Doug Mitchell and all these other great high school basketball coaches in the state of Indiana. And you've probably gotten firsthand knowledge from them saying something similar along the lines of, sometimes it may be more difficult than it used to be. But Greg, these young players love playing for coaches like Jack Kiefer, Doug Mitchell, and the other ones throughout the state of Indiana.
Guys don't mind being coached if they respect that coach. And guys like Doug Mitchell and Jack Kiefer demand that respect. Obviously, Doug has since retired in the last couple of years. I remember doing one of their games a couple of years ago, and I think the combined number of wins was 1,300, something along those lines. Jack is now north of 800, and he and J.R. Holmes keep going as far as being 1 and 2. And I forget if by the end of last year, if Jack had passed Jack Butcher, who was the legendary coach at Lagodi, who had the previous record of 806. That JR had passed at the end of the 2019 season. Okay. So I can't remember if Kiefer has passed him to second. They're first and third, but they'll be first and second if they're not already at some point in time this coming year. What I remember about that Carmel LN game is what told me just how good that LN team was. Mm-hmm. When you play Carmel, you're not getting up and down the floor. It's not happening. No. You are going to play their style. I remember having to convince people that was a great win for LN. Because was 39-37 or something. I'm like, guys, I said, that is a tournament game. Every time you play Carmel, it is a tournament game. And LN won that game. So I had seen LN get up and down the floor and put it on LC in early December. And then 2 months later, they win in very much a half-court game and win at Carmel. Both those being road wins and hostile environments. I'm like, you tell me you got a team that can play up and down and win, and you got a team that can play half-court and win and do in both of those games on the road. That's a special basketball team. Unfortunately, we'll never know, how things would have played out of that season. And for those that think LN would have easily beaten Bloomington South, they might have, but Bloomington South was good enough where I know that would have been a very competitive game if those two had seen each other the way that we thought they would have in the semi-state. So I can't sit here and tell you for certain that LN would have beat. If they played a 7-game series, I would have liked LN's chances. But because they would have played one time, Bloomington South was good enough where they could have beaten Lawrence North. But no, that's a great LN team. And frankly, even though they lose a couple of key pieces, obviously like Tony Perkins now playing at Iowa, they returned so many pieces, and people only saw CJ Gunn for about half the year, and he's now got multiple major Division I offers to go along with DJ Hughes and Shamar Avance, and so many kids that are playing football from that group that are good athletes and are good role players, that LN is absolutely loaded this year. And my guess is I'm going to see them a lot on the ISC Sports Network coming up this winter.
I believe so. Perfect segue. I believe you got I'm skipping over a lot of what I have on my notes. I'm running out of time. I know the ISC Sports Network, you got that, I believe in 2018 was named the vice president of that operation there. And I've said earlier, I've heard you on the radio. I've seen you call games on TV, but this provided a different outlet. Because I can be at my home, not even have cable or have the channel that you may be broadcasting the hometown sports of Indiana, those games on. Then all of a sudden you have the internet and you have apps, you have the Fire Stick, you have the Roku. So it's the next generation of being able to cover games, broadcast games, call games like you're doing. And you guys have been able to call not just Indiana high school basketball, football. I believe there's been volleyball. I believe soccer. I believe there's been track and field of the unified variety track and field. Some local sports, Marion. I don't know about for some reason St. Francis up north popped into my head. I don't know if you guys go that far up north. But that was a transition because I know you have been in radio for so long where you're working for a different style of broadcast company right now. How was that transition from going from one spectrum to the other?
Loved it. And it's the second time I have kind of made the jump from radio back to television. So in between my days at 950 and 1070 The Fan, I was with a company called Hometown Sports Indiana. And a lot of the ideas that we do on ISC, we kind of dabbled in when I was at Hometown. Different ownership group, but a lot of the same basic tenets of that. You know, if you put together a television and now web/app outlet for all of these small colleges and high schools and minor league teams, I think there's something to it. And from a business standpoint, there's advertising sales during games. There's selling productions to colleges. There is, now with pay-per-view and subscription fees and monthly subscribers to a website, there's different revenue streams. I don't want to get too caught up in the business end of things. But there's money to be made doing this. You can make a living, doing this, which I've been lucky enough to do now for the better part of the last 25 years. So I've always enjoyed doing a talk show, but it has always been second fiddle to doing play-by-play. Nothing beats being in a game live. Something different happens in every game. Put me in a press box, put me courtside, put me in a game, and my day has been generally a good day. I love doing the feature shows, like what I do with Soccer Saturday.
Yeah.
Like what I do with the Colts post games, where we can really sink our teeth into one topic and delve into it and break it down and things like that. Again, if I do a general talk show, great, I have fun. But honestly, it's a little further down the depth chart compared to the things that I just ended up mentioning there. So I like the ability to create something from scratch, to do something new. I love being hyper local. I love providing that outlet. I love doing it in a quality fashion. And so all those things really appeal to me about this opportunity with ISC. And now I have been there for 2.5 years, and the pandemic slowed us a little bit. But luckily, the fall's been pretty good to us, and hopefully it's started great things to come.
It has. And I want to ask one more thing. I know we're out of time. I have a lot more I wanted to get to. But one thing very quickly, and as you mentioned the hat earlier at IU, my mom went to IU, so I do root for them when it comes to basketball. Not football as well, but basketball is really more where my fandom goes to. Will we ever see, and I want to close this out with this way on purpose because I know you've been in Indianapolis for a while. You've worked with a guy by the name of Dan Dockich, been able to probably interview Gene Cady, maybe Bob Knight. So you've gotten a lot of both sides of it. Do you think we'll ever see IU and Kentucky play on a regular basis ever again?
Yes.
I had to ask. I asked Greg Doyle when he was on, and I asked you as well.
Won't happen this year, but it will happen. And at some point in time, John Calipari will move on to other things. At some point, IU will say, all right, we want to play on campus, but if for whatever reason you're going to play in Louisville and Indianapolis, that's fine. It's better than not playing at all. And so, yes, they will play again at some point in time. It will not be this year, given everything that's going on in our world. But honestly, given the fact that I think that going forward next year, there'll be less guarantee games. And what that means is when Kentucky plays in Evansville or in Appalachian State or Mississippi Valley State, or IU plays Southern Connecticut State, basically IU is giving those schools a check to come in and get their butt kicked.
Yeah.
And you will see a lot less of those as it takes a while for the revenue to kind of regenerate from college sports. you will see more like versus like. In other words, you will see more of IU Kentucky or IU playing an SEC team or IU playing a Big 12 team, because there's not that money changing hands for that game. I think because of that, and both schools knowing, like next year, I could see the celebration of basketball where IU and Kentucky play a game at Lucas Oil Stadium.
Oh,
With
wow.
the idea is, if it's fingers crossed,
Yeah.
safe for all of us to be together in that sort of space by 13 months from now, December of 2021, where they bring in 75,000 people and the court is in the middle of the football field, like it would be for a Final Four, just as a, hey, we got over this, gang, let's celebrate. What that would also mean, there would be about 35,000 paid tickets for each school to help make up for the money that they have lost over the course of the last year. So don't be surprised if those two schools are playing someplace next season.
I would love to see it. I remember the Watt shot.
Sure.
I think it was 2011.
Yep.
I think IU Kentucky played again in the tournament in recent years. I like rivalries. I'm a sports fan. You're a sports fan. We love those rivalries. I mentioned LN. I went to LC. In my high school basketball days, LN whipped up on LC all the time. It's gotten better, gotten closer more in the past few years than it used to be. But I miss those rivalries. In my Ohio State, I love when Ohio State plays Michigan in football. It's a rivalry game. No matter if one school's way better than the other, it seems like the competition comes closer during those games. Kids nowadays may not know how special that rivalry was or used to be with IU Kentucky, but I surely believe that whoever the next coach is of either school, that I sure hope that at some point it is like you to where that does come back and play again. Greg Rakestraw, we're out of time. We'd love to keep talking to you and make it a two-part, but I want to keep it with one part. Thank you so much for coming on the Jay Stevens podcast. Do you have any last comments you would like to make, either about indie sports or about your job or about broadcasting or about life currently or anything like that?
I realize how lucky I am to get to do what I do for a living, and I think I had good perspective on that. Not being able to be part of a sporting event from March 7th to May 27th, further cemented that in my mind. It is wonderful that we've been able to have sports to the degree in which we have had. I so miss more fans being at games. During the post-game show on Sunday for the Colts, we played the Julian Blackmon interception coming out of a break that sealed the game. And it wasn't Matt Taylor did a great job on the radio call, but it was the roar of the fans, the 10 to 12,000 that were in the building, that stood out to me. And I thought, how wonderful is that to hear a crowd at a sporting event? So, folks, we need to restart the economy, but we also need to keep taking precautions as well. So when you go out, mask up, give each other some space, spend your dollars if you can, follow your sports teams if you can, and hopefully at some point in time in 2021, from a sports standpoint, we'll get back to business as usual. But it's been wonderful to be able for me to have at least a bit more of a sense of normalcy from a sporting perspective, from about July on. And I realize again just how lucky I am to have the seat and the position in which I do, which I still get to go to ball games on a regular basis.
Absolutely. Love having you on here. Hopefully we'd have you on down the road as well. Get to more talk about things that happened from 2010 on instead of backtracking from 2000 or 98 to 2010. But thank you so much for coming on the Jay Stevens podcast, episode 150. It's a gentleman that I have loved to just not just talk to here in this setting, but also watch as he broadcasts games and does things not just on the radio, but TV side as well. Thank you so much, Greg, for coming on here on the Jay Stevens podcast.
Jay, my pleasure, buddy. Happy to hop on with you anytime.